Beware the man whose handwriting sways like a reed in the wind. This is a talk about hands and handwriting. I think of handwriting as a way to organize thought into shapes. I like shapes. I like organizing them. But because of recent neurological changes in my brain, I find shapes fall apart on me. My responsibility to forms cannot be properly fulfilled. So I present this talk in its falling apart form in the hope that it's not unintelligible or depressing. Part 1, Hands. In order to right away avoid being depressing, and because beginnings are important, I'll begin with a poem of the Roman poet Catullus, who lived in the 1st century BC and died at the age of 30. He was himself the beginning of the Roman lyric poetry tradition, and this is fragment 46, his poem invoking the beginning of spring. In Latin, the first part of the poem is Iam vera gelidos refert tepores. Now spring unlocks, now the equinox stops its blue rages, quiet as pages. I tell you, Catullus, leave Troy, leave the ground burning. They did. Look, we will change everything, all the meanings, all the clear cities of Asia, you and me. Now the mind, isn't she an avid previous hobo? Now the feet grow leaves, so glad to see whose green baits awaits. Oh, sweet, don't go back the same way, go a new way. Catullus was perhaps the favorite poet of a painter named Twombly, about whom I'll say more in a minute. Twombly was a painter who used a lot of handwriting on his canvases. Critics were provoked by this, and Roland Barthes wrote an essay about it in his Responsibility of Forms. How to draw a line that is not stupid is a question he asks at the beginning of this essay. How to draw a line that is not stupid. Isn't this one of our big problems as humans? Whether I am me, or whether I am Hitler, or whether I am William von Humboldt, it is a problem of human life. So let's start with life, your life. There it is before you. Possibly a road, a ribbon, a dotted line, a map. Let's say you're 25. Then you make some decisions, do things, have setbacks, have triumphs, become someone. A bus driver, a professor, a pirate. Years pass, maybe in a family, maybe not. Maybe happy, maybe not. Then one day you wake up and you're 70. Looking ahead, you see a black doorway. You begin to notice the black doorway is always there, at the edge, whether you look at it or not. Most moments contain it. Most moments have a sort of sediment of black doorway at the bottom of the glass. You wonder if other people are seeing it too. You ask them, they say no. You ask why, no one can tell you. A minute ago you were 25. Then you went ahead getting the life you want. One day you glanced over from 25 to now, and there it is, the doorway, black and waiting. When I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a symptom particularly mortifying to me was that my handwriting disintegrated. I had used to take pleasure in writing, in notebooks, shelves of them, day after day, year after year. Now the upright strokes bend or break or go in all directions. Vowels shrink to blobs. Slant loses its smooth, smart angle. It all looks just embarrassing. Or Roland Barthes would say stupid. I scrub out whole paragraphs in shame. Hard to describe or explain the shame of bad handwriting. Bad handwriting is ugly, it looks sort of stupid, and I was going to say it feels inauthentic, but then realized the opposite is the case. In its badness, my chaotic handwriting seems to reveal something about me that I would rather not look at. It carries what Gerard Manley Hopkins calls the inscape out. Beware the man whose writing sways like a reed in the wind, said Confucius. Graphology, as I'm sure you know, is the study of handwriting as a clue to character analysis. Hard to believe it isn't a good clue. If my script slants to the right, I am a person strongly influenced by my father. If I am a procrastinator, I dot my I's to the left. If I am Hitler, I have a very, very, very tiny script and dot my I's with a slash mark. And here is an interesting incidental fact about hands. When a person who has been paralyzed from the neck down is given a tool that allows them to write with their mouth, they reproduce the same handwriting style as they had before paralysis. Your handwriting is your brain, and your brain is you. But Parkinson's disease messes with all that. It turns off certain genes in the cells of the brain, no one knows why. This leads to decreased levels of a brain chemical called dopamine and to unusual electrical rhythms. Many physical actions are inhibited or mangled, like brushing one's teeth or writing with the hand. But scriptural disintegration is just an image of the beginning of a cognitive breakdown whose gradual effects will include disorder, discontinuity, forgetting, gaps and fissures, slowdowns and stops. Here is a medical explanation of what's happening. This is from a book called The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge. Each cell in our body contains all our genes, but not all those genes are turned on or expressed. When a gene is turned on, it makes a new protein that alters the structure and function of the cell. This is called the transcription function, because when the gene is turned on, information about how to make these proteins is transcribed or read from the individual gene. What I take from this is that the brain has its own handwriting, which depends on a certain protein. I can imagine my poor brain throwing up its hands in dismay to find all the good handwriting protein gone or piled in the corner in a mess. How to draw a line that is not stupid. When critics talk about the late style of Beethoven or Baudelaire, I wonder, do they mean marks on paper as well as, or as a clue to, hauntings in the brain? Here we enter the shatter zone, hands within hands. Metabolic and metaphorical vectors overlap. Is this confusing? Yes, it is confusing. In the history of art, late works are the catastrophes, said Theodor Adorno famously in his essays on music. As I am not keen on considering myself a catastrophe, let's turn from late style to early style. The world's earliest writing systems developed independently in 3 places: the Near East, China, and Mexico. All 3 began as systems of counting or accounting, a way to keep track of goods or money. Later, that is, thousands of years later, a concern for the afterlife paved the way to literature by using writing for funerary inscriptions. Death and property, you could say, 2 of our most basic anxieties, seemed able to be managed or at least placated by putting marks on a surface, and so inspired the first systematic mark-making, the first writing. The psychology of one particular moment in this evolution interests me, the moment of transition from the realm of material things goods or money, to that of words and ideas, poems about death. Let's take ourselves back to 3,500 BC and to the kingdom of the Sumerians, present-day Iraq. Here people kept track of debts by counting out clay tokens and placing them in a clay envelope. To simplify matters, some accountants began marking the outside of the clay envelope to signify the number of tokens inside. Presumably, the number of tokens inside the envelope would be exactly the same as the number of marks on the outside. But what if it wasn't? Might there be room here for mistakenness or even duplicity? At any rate, when the outside does not match the inside, things may be going, or have gone, awry. That boundary is not so simple. It's possible I am overthinking this imaginary moment of early scripture, but it fascinates me how introducing a dialectic of inside and outside polarizes the attributes of each, and may so easily slide sideways into judgments of right and wrong, good or bad. So let's be a little more subtle about the problem of bad handwriting. It would seem to have two possible solutions. One, perfect its craft so that the handwriting is not bad. Two, disown the craft so that the badness doesn't matter. Examples. John Keats, in his manuscripts, would be an example of the first way, the way of perfection. When publishing a volume of poems, Keats copied out the text in a hand so regular, flowing, and confident, it's hard to believe the writer ever had a moment of doubt or despair at any point in the composition of the lines. Keats was a romantic, as an artist much concerned with self and selfhood. The sheer beauty of his fair copies seems a revelation, if not a celebration, of what he considers his own best self. At the other end of the spectrum, consider the 20th century artist Twombly, whose modernist conception of self and selfhood was quite different than Keats. Born in Lexington, Virginia, 1928, Twombly was once declared by Art Forum magazine to be the greatest American painter of the 20th century. He loved books. His inspiration was often literary. His paintings feature handwritten words inscribed in such a way as to avoid offering any clues to himself or his character or his inside state. Scribbled, scrawled, gauche, idle, unlovely, the hand is no one's, or everyone's, or mythic, or just a stain left behind by something written before. You cannot get away from yourself in your own hand, I used to think, but then Twombly does. In his essay on Twombly, Roland Barthes describes his handwriting as drifting between desire and politeness, or, quoting the Tao Te Ching, the hand of a man acting without expectation. How to draw a line that is not stupid. Like certain other artists of the modern era, Twombly seems to have been intent on leaving the self behind, evading the ego and its marks, positing emptiness as more interesting than presence. Twombly was best friends with John Cage, the well-known composer of 433 and other ego-emptying artworks. As Cage put it, something has to be done to rid us of our memories and choices. What John Cage did was to introduce chance operations into his work. What Twombly did was to find his way to a handwriting that has no person in it. Critics sometimes refer to Twombly's line as graffiti-like. I don't think Twombly enjoyed hearing this. Graffiti is often ugly and usually at some level activist. Its character is that of the egotistical sublime, as Keats said of Wordsworth. I once asked the artist Tacita Dean about Twombly's attitude to all this. She was a friend of his. She came to know him very well while making a film about him. And she said, "For Cy, I always believed it was about the encounter, and a bit like a medium with a Ouija board. When he's in the moment, he cannot be interrupted, even by himself, or the connection is broken. When he's in the moment, the encounter becomes the painting and nothing else matters." This moment is one that Roland Barthes locates inside Twombly's handwriting. Barthes remarks on the lightness of Twombly's line, his impulse to, quote, link in a single state what appears and what disappears, not to separate the exaltation of life from the fear of death, but to produce a single affect, neither eros nor thanatos, but life-death in a single thought, a single gesture. And here is an interesting incidental fact about exaltation. When a Twombly painting called Farewell, Catullus to the Shores of Asia Minor was exhibited in Houston a few years ago, a guard found a French woman standing in front of the canvas, totally unclothed. "That painting makes me want to run naked," she wrote in the guest book. Twombly was delighted. "No one can top that," he said to the New York Times. Well, let's perk ourselves up here with a random homonym and another brief poetic interlude. Once I lived in Los Angeles for a while, and had a friend from Mexico, a composer, whose ambition in life was to compose an entire symphony out of the sound of people sighing. His name was Guillermo. Guillermo's Sigh Symphony. Do you hear sighing? Do you wake amid a sigh? Radio sighs AM, FM. Shortwave sighs crackle in from the Atlantic. Hot sighs steam in the dawn. People kissing stop to sigh, then kiss again. Doctors sigh into wounds and the bloodstream is changed forever. Flowers sigh and two noon bees float backwards. Is it doubt? Is it disappointment? The world didn't owe me anything. Leaves come sighing in the door. Bits of girls sigh like men. Forgery sigh twice. Balthus sighs and lies about it, claiming it was Byron's sigh. A sigh may come too late. Is it better than screaming? Give me all your sighs for $4 or $5. A sigh is weightless, yet it may interrupt the broadcast. Can you abstain? What is that hush that carries itself up each sigh? We hunt together, the sigh and I, sport of kings. To want to stop is beyond us. The more sighs shine, the more I'm in trouble. Some kind of silvery stuff. You thought it was the sea. Part 2, Tremor. Tremor, what is it? Uncontrollable shaking of a limb, identified by the English surgeon and apothecary James Parkinson in 1817 as one of the first symptoms noticeable in people suffering what he called the shaking palsy. Before that, we find mention of a shaking disease in an Ayurvedic treatise from 10th century BC India, and Galen, the ancient Greek doctor, noticed an affliction he called skeleturbe, which might be charmingly translated as revelry of limbs. But it was not until the 20th century that neurologists came to think this revelry could be quieted by physical and mental action. That is, by physical exercise focused with deliberate and intense mental attention. If the brain is plastic, as we now believe it is, it can be changed. Certain activities can rewire it by generating new neurons to replace lost ones, or by exciting neurons that have gone idle or slow. Boxing is recommended. Its combination of difficult cardiovascular effort and deliberate focusing of the mind has proven to reduce the symptoms and slow the progress of the disease. Body and brain work together. Do you ever wonder what it's like inside the brain? Is it a noisy workroom or a silent laboratory? What does a sound like in there? Myself, I imagine it as a big boardroom with CEOs sitting around, staring at their phones and sending one another texts. And the spookiest part of this would be, presumably, they're all there sitting in the total dark. It would be dark inside the brain, wouldn't it? Where would light come from? And who would see it? Anyway, going back to Tremor, I brush my teeth with my right arm and right hand, where I have a tremor. The toothbrush therefore goes whamming up and down at a savage pace, colliding with lips and gums. This revelry of toothbrush is produced by electricity flowing along a nerve path. But a nerve path has a plane of action. If I concentrate and change the plane by moving my arm up or down at an eccentric angle, I can interrupt the flow and still the tremor. Or if I grip the toothbrush handle really tight, I can master the shaking by intensity of focus. Concentration is key. I have to think into the motion. In my own brutal understanding of it, thinking makes neurons, or makes neurons move. A man named John D. Pepper has made a similar discovery in managing his problems walking. This gentleman, born London 1938, now living in Cape Town, is a bit of a hero, or at least a significant innovator, in the Parkinson's community. He addresses his problems with walking by walking 15 miles a week in 3 sessions of 5 miles each at a pace of 4 miles per hour. 4 miles per hour is a faster pace than I naturally want to walk. It is a struggle. I have to pay attention to the motion. So whereas you would perform a complex action like walking or toothbrushing automatically because the CEOs sitting around the boardroom in your brain are sending memos to one another, making clear what each is supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it, I have to stop and think and apply conscious control. It is the opposite of the exalted state of Twombly seated at his painting. By engaging the conscious movement technique, John D. Pepper has been able to tame his tremor and other symptoms. He got Parkinson's when he was in his 30s and is now in his 90s. Still walking 4 miles per hour. Pepper's may not be an entirely new discovery. James Parkinson records in his case notes of 1817 that the patient called Case 6 was able to interrupt his interminable shaking for a few minutes by a brief, sudden, deliberate movement. Philosophically, there is something worthy of notice here having to do with attention. When we bring an action out of habit and into consciousness, we stir up a new perception of it. Inside and outside change places. Time shifts. Parkinson's disease is always now. Or maybe we could say the disease reminds us that life is now. And at this point, my reasoning bumps into Gertrude Stein's famous sentence from 1913. Rose is a rose is a rose is a rose. Rose, it's a rose, it's a rose, it's a rose. About which she herself made the following comment. Now you all have seen hundreds of poems about roses, and you know in your bones that the rose is not there. I think in that line the rose is read for the first time in English poetry in 100 years. Part 3, boxing. I go to boxing class 3 times a week. Everyone in the class has Parkinson's, various degrees of damage. At a certain point in each class, after we've done warm-up and strength training and footwork drills, the coach yells out, "Gloves on!" and we rush to the lockers to get out our boxing gloves. Then station ourselves, each of us at a heavy bag, and go ahead punching. As you may know, there are 6 basic kinds of boxing punches. Each has a number. 1, jab. 2, cross. 3, hook with left hand. 4, hook with right hand. 5, uppercut with left hand. 6, uppercut with right hand. You can see what a great boxer I am in that demonstration. It's better with the gloves on. The central portion of a boxing class involves punching the heavy bag according to a combination of numbers called out by the coach. We each reproduce the punches that match the numbers. It all goes quite fast. I find that when I am trying to perform a complicated boxing combination, I can feel the neurons in my brain struggling and striving. I know this sounds crazy, but as we saw earlier, that boundary between inside and outside is not so simple. The more I know about Parkinson's disease, the more I see it as holding oneself upright against a current that never ceases to pull. The books all tell me to pay conscious, continual attention to actions like walking, writing, brushing my teeth, if I want to inhibit or delay the failure of neurons in the brain. It is hard to live within constant striving. It is hard to live within the word degenerative, which means that, however I strive, I do not win. Of course, everyone is striving all their life, and none of us will win against mortality. But there is a difference, or so it seems, between striving to, say, learn ancient Greek or get up off the couch and do the vacuuming, and striving to pay microscopic attention to every instant of a physical act. Studying his own way of walking, John D. Pepper analyzed it into 9 segments of action and 6 targets of attention for each step that he takes. The man is intense. But before we leave the topic of striving, one more observation about boxing class. At the midpoint of every class, the coach yells, "Gloves on!" and we head for our lockers to get out the boxing gloves. Now, putting on your first boxing glove is easy because you still have another hand. Putting on the second glove, not so easy. Meanwhile, the coach is yelling, "Don't use your teeth." So, conventional practice is to look around for someone at large in the gym and ask him or her to put on your glove for you. As I'm a classics person, it struck me that this whole situation whereby one human being stands before another asking for help has the same structure as the ancient Greek ritual called supplication, hikateia, as when Priam comes to the tent of Achilles at the end of the Iliad and supplicates for the body of his son. And in my boxing class, I observe that it is all but All but. Impossible when someone else is putting a glove on your hand to conjure up or worry about the black doorway. Writing this essay in a notebook with a pencil has been a chastening exercise. The handwriting is partly legible. I do not achieve any John Cage-like liberation from the shackles of myself with this scrawl. The hand seems, in fact, to be all too much me. Speaking of authenticity, though, here is one final interesting incidental fact. During the Second World War, Twombly was in the Army and assigned to the cryptography division, where he spent a couple of years deciphering other people's stupid lines on paper. We should be careful how we read the marks on that clay envelope. But really, what difference does handwriting make? Almost everyone to whom I mentioned my worries about bad handwriting said something like, "Oh, I've always had awful writing. No one in my family can read it, and it gets worse over time. Nowadays, I do everything on computer." Often when people say this, they sound a bit sheepish. I wanted to get another angle on this sheepishness, so I decided to question composers about the difference between making a musical score by hand and using a computer program. First, I asked the American composer David Lang, who said that he began writing scores on computer in the early 90s, but always wondered what this might have changed in his composing, as he often uses a lot of math and graphs and charting of proportions, which are much easier to do on computer. So in 2003, he decided to see what it would be like to return to the old ways. He wrote a piece called "This Was Written by Hand," completely made with just a pencil on paper. I'll quote what he said about that experience. "I tried to make it as complicated and structured as the other music I was writing at the time, but I discovered that I no longer had the patience, so the piece ended up being a lot simpler. Then I had the idea that the music should only be published in a facsimile of my paper score, but when I tried to copy the music over neatly enough to publish it by hand, I kept making mistakes and it became illegible, so I ended up copying it on my computer and publishing that version." After David Lang, I went to the Icelandic composer Marja Holdmarken Sigfúsdóttir, who had a very different view. She said, "Well, it's a bit hard to describe, but I feel more in touch with the music, almost as if writing by hand has the same quality as playing." She's a violinist. "Or that the music is more real, not as generic as it sometimes seems when writing on the computer. I feel like each of the notes has an individual personality when handwritten, and this can be exaggerated with different emphasis on size, shape, or space of each note." After she had shown me some of her handwritten scores, Marja added a third angle to the whole situation by telling me that before she puts any notes on paper, she makes a drawing that has neither notes nor words, just shapes and colors indicating the ideas for the work. She seemed diffident about mentioning these sketches. Perhaps we are all a little uneasy with our own pre-verbal selves. However that may be, none of them seem to construe the situation as a crisis of self or a test of character, as I did. For this conviction, I had to fall back on Confucius, "Beware the man whose handwriting sways like a reed in the wind," not to mention Roland Barthes' inexhaustible question, "How to draw a line that is not stupid." At this point, I felt I had exhausted aesthetics and turned to science where there is a substantial body of evidence demonstrating that handwriting stimulates different and more complex brain connections than typing on a keyboard. Connections essential to encoding new information and forming memories. The precisely controlled movements of handwriting lead to patterns in the brain that promote learning. The brain opens, deepens, and enriches itself. There is in it, speaking subjectively, an exhilaration and a feeling of homecoming. Homecoming brings us near to the end of the lecture. To sum up, actually I'm terrible at summing up, so let's end with another text of Catullus. This, astonishingly, is a recently discovered papyrus in which John D. Pepper interviews Catullus on various topics. I'll impersonate John D. Pepper. Catullus will speak from the deep antiquity of the audience. And John D. Pepper speaks first. Death.
Death made me grow up.
Love.
Love made me endure.
Malady.
Malady does not rest.
Passion.
Passion bewildered me.
Parsnips.
Parsnips taste like violets.
Violets.
Violets smell like parsnips.
Gods.
Gods cause me to be silent.
Bureaucrats.
Bureaucrats make me melancholy.
Tears.
Tears are my sisters.
Laughter.
I wish I had a splendid laugh.
Warfare.
Ah, warfare.
Humankind.
Humankind is glass.
Roses.
I hate roses.
The line.
A line is just a lure.
Why not take the shorter way home?
There was no shorter way home.
There was no shorter way home. The end. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I think we're going to have some house lights come up. You have a few minutes for questions. Please raise your hand if you want to ask one. Wait for the roving mic and speak directly into the roving mic, because the online audience were complaining that people weren't doing that last time. There's also some online questions that I'll turn to, but we'll start with one from the room. I can see a hand in the middle aisle if one of the roving mics could head up that way.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks very much, Anne. Sorry. You said right at the beginning that when you saw how your handwriting had changed, you used the word embarrassing. It was embarrassing, and then you said later on it was chastening. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about embarrassment specifically. And I don't want to phrase it as the uses of embarrassment, but your embarrassment has given us such an amazing lecture. So I just wondered about if you could speak a bit more about embarrassment. Thank you.
Yeah, embarrassment. It's a funny thing. I always try to, when I'm asked about a thing in me, I always try to think what it would be like for an ancient Greek to think that, to ask that or think that. And they don't have a word for embarrassment in ancient Greek, which is puzzling. They have a word for shame, which is related to embarrassment, but much less trivial or something. But I think what what happened with the handwriting was that looking at it, I realized I could never be different than I am, which is supposed to, perhaps, the thing you're supposed to recognize around age 17, and somehow I missed that stop. Still trying to get there on the train, but it's a feeling of displacement for me from the self that I had been imagining I was, and then see, no, you're this. And I guess that's good and bad, both. I mean, it's always good to lose your preconceptions about anything, but especially the self. But it gives a different place to stand to look at whatever situation you're in. I think that's the effect it had on me, was just to make me stop and think, you know, what does it mean to be this person? What does it mean to be mortal, basically, you know? Because when you're given a disease thing, you have to look at death and think, well, how will that be? What could I do to make that, like, more enjoyable for myself? Maybe not being embarrassed about it would be one aspect of that enjoyment. I don't know. But yeah, well, good question.
And there was an article in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago that was saying that handwriting might fall out of the culture completely within a couple of generations.
Yeah.
As people do what the friends in your lecture do. Do you have a sense of what that does to society at large?
Yeah, I think it would be tragic, really. I notice, well, there are lots of other examples of this, but it does show up in people I teach. I'm a professor sometimes. It shows up in a different attitude to time. It's all about the attitude to time, that what makes people impatient about handwriting, about writing things by hand, is the time that it takes, partly. And so nowadays that's removed. And with the removal of the time it takes to do a thing is removed the state of mind they call reverie, in which you think on your way to thinking. You're not thinking yet exactly what you're going to think, but you're getting there. And that procedure is, I think, where we grow up, you know, as people who have mentality. You learn to move around in your own brain in that space of reverie. And handwriting, among other things, is one of the places where you get to practice that. If it's gone, I mean, think how fast texting goes now. Everything about texting is getting the thing done in 4 seconds. Why? I mean, what's the rush? And then you end up with a message that's always misspelled and usually ungrammatical and kind of stupid. It's just, you know, what do you want from Starbucks? I'm going there on the way home. Who really cares? But anyway, so I think it would be really a tragedy if we lost handwriting.
A question from Sarah on the live stream. Are there any changes in your handwriting that you welcome? Have they changed the way you compose in a way that's interesting? I suppose that's what the lecture's about, but also perhaps you can answer it more directly.
I wouldn't say. I mean, it's made me envious of Twombly because he manages to write in a messy, silly way that's somehow also incredibly forceful. I think when I see my messy handwriting, it just looks, well, as I said, stupid. That's what Roland Barthes, that's that word he locates, which is the right word. It looks stupid. So, no, I don't think it has improved anything for me, actually.
Do you have any more questions from the room? I can see a hand on the 3rd row here, down the middle aisle.
Oh.
Thank you. I wondered, how do you feel when you box, and what's your favourite punch?
How do I feel? It's exhilarating. A number of people in the class mentioned anger, being angry, and using the anger on on the punching. I never have got to that yet. I'm not an angry person, maybe, but instead of anger, I have the kind of exhilaration that goes with anger, the kind of heightening of senses and perception. Favorite punch? It's hard to say. The combination, the 1 through 6 combination, is just extremely pleasurable. The way it locks together, and each one comes out of the one before, and it's just a lovely little sequence, like a metrical shape in a poem. So I think I really like all 6 of them together. We could
Rose
vote
asks,
on that. Anybody have a preference for one punch over another?
No one's volunteering. Rose on the live stream asks, have you written any poems about boxing?
Yeah, years ago, I did write a poem about, in TV Men, there's a poem about boxing, a shadow boxer. I forget why. It was, it was an okay poem at the time. Not great. But oddly enough, I remembered the other day, out of the blue, that when I was 10 years old, I think I was in grade 6, we had to do a project about a way of life, and I did the history of boxing. It was like a big tabletop cardboard collage with stand-up figures of the Marquis of Queensberry and so on. It was really terrific. I wish I still had it, but Mother threw it out.
Another question from the room. I can see, okay, so we'll go to the gentleman at the back first. So just about 3 rows down, thank you.
Very much. Thank you very much. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2017, and I'm just getting used now to the concepts of switching off and switching on. I wondered whether they'd given you any pause for thought.
No, explain that, can you?
The switching off is the sensation as you come to the end of the efficacy of the dose of the medication that you're taking. So it's an obviousness of slowing down and a paralysis of a kind and a stiffness, but which you can almost anticipate because it's the end of the drug cycle of its efficacy. It tells you that you need to take the next medicine, really. But it's an idea that I struggle with and think about a lot. This sense of myself switching off at some point, and whether I like it or not, unless I take a tablet.
Yeah, I don't at the present have that sensation. Other people in the boxing class have mentioned that, a number of them, a number of times, but I don't myself experience it. But it must be, distressing. You have to expect it up and down. The medication so far doesn't affect me that much that I would notice a pattern.
There was another question slightly further up in the middle there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for your lecture. I just wondered, do you ever think about AI?
In how? In what way?
And how? I'm so worried about it. What it might do to our minds, the fact that it's around us so much and it's hyped so much.
Mm-hmm. And you want me to solve that for you? The gloves are the only way. Can AI box? I wonder. Yeah, well, that's an avenue of thought I had not explored, so thanks, I'll do that. Perhaps over dinner.
Is the Anne Carson bot AI-driven, or is there a person behind it? We just don't know, do we?
No.
The fact that it stopped suggests there's a person.
Did it stop? I wasn't really following the bot. But if it stopped, I'm glad.
Kyle on the live stream asks, it's said that vibrato, tremor of the voice, deliberately masks imperfections in pitch. Do you have thoughts about tremors of sound as well as movement?
No. I don't have a single thought about that. I guess I'm not a singer or anything, so I really wouldn't know how it would affect I mean, in giving a talk, you have to control your voice to some extent, but I have no idea what it sounds like. In my head, it just sounds, as I say, stupid. So I don't have any sort of two sides to that knowledge. So no, I just say no.
The Twombly pictures, it struck me that your last book, Wrong Norma, has lots of images with quite a sort of Twombly-ish energy about them, some of them. I wondered how this has affected your drawing and the role drawing serves in your creative practice, and whether there's a kind of parallel story that's slightly different.
I don't find that that the tremor kicks in when I'm drawing. So that's provocative, isn't it? Someone should study that.
PhDs will be written. Sure.
Sure they will.
More questions from the room. We've got one in this side of the middle aisle. So if you just come down about halfway. It's right on the other side of the row from where you are. So keep coming down, but we'll have to pass the mic across.
This is very like my brain trying to find a neuron to do the thing it needs to.
Cy Twombly's my first ever favourite artist, and I can really remember the first time I encountered his work and what that experience was like as a teenager. And I wondered if you could share a bit about what that was like for you encountering his work.
I think I first encountered it because Curry took me to the Philadelphia Art Museum, where they have the sequence about the Iliad. I think it's, I don't know what it's called, but anyway, it's a whole room full of paintings about Achilles and Agamemnon and so on. And I was in school, teaching school at the time in classics, and it was just fabulous to have somebody actually using all this material that I thought of as too esoteric to be cared about by anybody my own age. And then also to have half of it misspelled, because, he misspells Iliad. He deliberately did it wrong and then waited for people to complain, and no one did, and he was incensed that no one cared that he spelled the Iliad wrong. But anyway, so yeah, it was completely exhilarating to me to see that room. You should all go to Philadelphia and see that room. He should, yeah.
I think we've got time for about 2 more questions. So I can see another hand a bit closer. Actually, maybe, no. Come down about 3 more rows, and then again, sorry, it's the other end of the row. No, keep coming. And then the end of that row, thank you.
Hi, just working. I thought that the handwriting in your text Knox always resembled Cy Twombly, the way you write Michael at the beginning. And I was wondering what you were thinking about the self present in the printed handwriting of that text and your handwriting now.
That's complicated. The writing of the Michael, the name. One thing, though, is it's off again. Yeah, it's. I wrote his name in cursive. Twombly never uses cursive. It's always printing, as far as I remember. No, there are some. There are some that are scrawled that way. So I didn't think about Twombly at that time. I can't remember when I did that, but it was long before I think long before I knew about Twombly's work or had studied it, looked at it carefully. So I don't know. I like the way the book looks. I like the way that name works on that page, but I don't know that I thought of it as Twombly-like at the time. But thank you. It's nice to remember that page.
Rather than a final question, we're actually going to hand over to Curry for a final moment. So if we could get that mic there to the front here. Before I hand over to Curry, it'd be great if we could just say thank you to Anne one more time.
Hello. Hello, hello. Oh, there we are. You know, when Anne and I do performances together, we always end it in a particular way. And even though this is Anne's lecture, we decided we still have to end it in that particular way. So, there's an artist who is one of the great artists of the last 75 years, Yoko Ono, who in 1961, I think, wrote a piece called the Scream Symphony. And Anne and I, for a number of years, have ended our performances with the Scream Symphony. So what we're going to ask you to do is for 10 seconds, scream at the top of your lungs, remembering Yoko and thinking about joy. So on three, Anne will count it off. Everybody's going to scream for 10 seconds. You ready?
1, 2, 3.
Thank you. Thank you.